Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and join me as we talk to other knife makers and craftsmen about anything and everything knives. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. My name is Aaron Levere, and I have with me Steve Schwarzer. Now, if you've never heard of Steve and his contributions towards the knife industry, I don't know what rock you've lived under, but Steve has for a long time been a contributor to the ABS. He's a mastersmith. He's done profound work in the world of Mosaic, Damascus especially, and now he's turned his attention to teaching the world his craft and passing on his legacy. And I thought it'd be a really great idea to have him on the podcast and talk a little bit about him and record it for posterity's sake. So, Steve, incredible honor to have you on here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoy helping out, and this is one of the ways I contribute, and it's fun stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy doing the podcast to be able to get to talk to people like yourself and really just kind of pick your brain and understand from the horse's mouth, as it were, some of the legacy of knives, because, only being in it, 7 years, there's a lot of things that I've only read in, through research and through anecdotal conversations with other knife makers. And this is my opportunity to be able to talk to people I could get on the podcast and at least record that, because there's so many great conversations that happen between knife makers, especially when we're retelling things or conveying tribal knowledge. And I think it gets lost from maker to maker, that the context and everything around the history around knives. So it helps, I hope, for other listeners to be able to paint a larger picture by having people such as yourself on and talk through those things. So
it makes it fun. The history, the anecdotal history is like you said, tribal. It's mouth to ear, and it can get lost in one generation. If one person dies and the other person doesn't remember it or remembers pieces of it, they don't tell the whole story, and then it all goes away. That's what happened with some of the steel technologies over hundreds of years, and some of it, many hundreds of years ago, was lost because the techniques went away and because nobody was talking. Nobody passed it on. It's a blacksmith kid had to work too hard for his daddy, and you know how daddy situations work. Well, then he decided he'd rather go herd camels or go cut wood than work in the blacksmith shop. And so all that knowledge his dad passed on to him is gone in one generation if they didn't write it down.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I had Bruce Bump on quite a few episodes ago, but at the time, my exposure to the cut and shoot, or what he calls dual threat knives, was fairly limited. But I actually, after talking with him, it opened up my world to researching a lot more about combination weapons, and realized that there was actually a fairly long lineage of that. And he was one of the makers in the modern era to bring that back into public visibility. And so a little bit of naivete on my side, but I think that's what's beneficial, is like, what are these lost histories and how do we revive them and talk about them? And if it wasn't for people like yourself talking about those things actively and trying to research it as diligently as you do, I think that we'd be far less forward on our thinking on how to master these things. So,
oh, absolutely. I take my hat off to him and Vince Evans and a few more that Vince does mostly historical cutting edges, but there's some guys out there that are doing those cut and shoot pieces and historically correct stuff, and then some modern interpretations of them. But that was in a time where you got one shot, and if that didn't hit, you better have backup, and whipping somebody that's still loaded up with a pistol is not a good plan. If it's got an axe on the end of it, it helps.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to me about thinking about combination weapons and those weapons that are purely utilitarian, because I know that Will is a protege of yours for a lot of this Mosaic Damascus and things like that you guys have done together. And I remember an episode on him and Alex's YouTube channel where they were doing a sword breaker, and how like talking about how very specific that design is, and how like brittle the build is, and being able to actually break swords, and how often it was used, and how nobody really sees it anymore because it wasn't used readily, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it wasn't practical. It it was almost used like a shield. They would trap a blade with it. They called it a sword breaker, but unless the sword was too hard and not flexible enough, generally a sword would take a bend, or if you look at the Toledo blades, especially where they were used against those things, I've literally had one in my hands that you could bend the tip around and touch the end of the tang with it, and it'd go back straight. They were like giant springs. So the sword breaker wasn't effective on that to break the sword, but you could catch the sword with it, and then you had a secondary dagger or a short sword that you dispatched the guy with once you got his weapon entangled. And that tradition runs all over the planet. I mean, the Japanese had entanglement tools. I mean, there's a bunch of different iterations of that sort of thing. But warfare is the greatest driver of technology of anything in the world. Everything, all the great medical stuff and the military stuff, and like my shop is completely full of space technology, and because I'm using ceramic wool and high temperature ceramics and stuff in my forges that were designed for the space program. You can literally take an inch of that kale wool and put 2,700 degrees on the other side of it and lay your hand on it. And so all that technology transfers into what we're doing as bladesmiths if you look for it.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about the cross-discipline of knife making today, there's really not a lot that knife makers don't use that don't touch a lot of other technological industries. Like, for instance, like heat treating, like in high carbon steels, I recognize that heat treating is fairly rudimentary. Like, it's this is the process that you follow. But then if you're going through high stainless or have differential heat treating or things like that, like those are all techniques that are used in a lot of different industries to get a certain type of ductility or hardness for a very purpose-driven tool or something of that nature, and it's used everywhere. So heat treating is just a thing that a lot of other industries use. That cross-discipline also helps in perfecting blades as well. So,
oh, that's heat treating is the heart and soul of any blade, any cutting tool. It's more important than almost the material. If you've got enough carbon in any steel to harden properly, then the heat treatment is paramount. That's what makes it shine or not shine. It is the heat treatment. That's the whole thing. That's the most important part of it. And the second thing that comes along, and some people think it's first, is edge configuration for the designed use. And that's something people don't really study. They just assume things. So it's that's a whole science into itself.
Yeah, that's something that I actually was very interested in the ABS for, and specifically the Journeyman Smith and Mastersmith program, is that I think that for the technical inspection of knives, so your test knife and everything, you're really testing the functionality of heat treat and edge geometry and things for a good utility knife, and you expect that as part of the fundamentals of knife making to be performed and to be tested. And I've noticed, especially with those in the ABS, that there's a lot of functional testing that is done to make sure that knives conform to that. So, like for me, doing stock removal and everything, I don't necessarily take my knives and before I send them out, I beat them or stress test them to make sure that they're adequate. But I've noticed that there's a lot of guys in the ABS especially that will do a bunch of testing on that knife before they ever send it out to make sure it conforms to those parameters. And I've always really admired that, because if a knife can withstand damage or utilization to that degree before it goes into the customer's hand, then you know that like every single blade is tested to a high degree.
Right. You don't. And the thing is, yeah, and if you do enough of it, then you have a benchmark, and you have to know your material and the ranges that it heat treats in for certain uses. It's like I've got like probably high 20s or maybe over 30 knives on one high fence ranch out in Texas, and that's over a 25 or 30 year period of dealing with people that own the ranch. And I've been making these little skinners for over 30 years, and the design hadn't changed much. So I've got it down to a bare minimum so I can make them in batches. So I can sell them where somebody can afford one. And I set those knives up with a certain edge configuration. They're 60 Rockwell and they're 52-100. And I only had 2 complaints from them in all those years. It's because I ground some that were like paper thin for skinning. And they gave them to ranch hands. And those guys went out and they called me and they said, "We got a problem with these 2 knives you sent." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Well, the edges are chipping." And I went, "Okay, let me see what you did." Anyway, well, they'd given to these ranch hands and they used them like they use the other ones. And these were set up for skinning. That's all they were designed to do. They're scalpels. And they'd been breaking joints and driving them into bones and batoning the things and all kinds of. Anyway, they sent them back. And the only thing I did was take the chips out of the edge and reset the angle on the edge. And they went back out there and never had another problem with them. And but that's where you know your stuff. If you're a beginner, then you begin to second guess your heat treating, and maybe I left it too hard. And that was all edge geometry is what that was. But the thing is, you've got to know your materials. There's a couple of anecdotal stories. One I met, the guy's name was a little guy who used to hang out up at, especially on the East Coast. He'd come to hammer ends like Ashokan and up on the East Coast, and he'd come down south a little bit once in a while. The guy's name was Charlie Hoyle, and he caught me, and I'd been drinking a little bit. One of those hammer ends back in the old days. I don't drink now, but I did then a little bit. And he said, "What can I get for $150? And I said, "A rivet." So he stayed after me. He said, when are you going to make me a knife? And I said, "Well, Charlie, I don't want to make you a knife for $150. Anyway, he stayed after me and he caught me. I'd had a couple of drinks and I said, "Okay, I'll make you a knife for $150. Anyway, it got to where I was dodging the guy for like 2 years. I'd see him coming, I'd disappear in the crowd because I didn't want to answer him. Anyway, he called me up one time and said, "This is Charlie Hoyle. You got to make my knife or not?" And I said, "Okay." So I got pissed off. And I said, "I'm going to make it today." And I went out into my scrapyard and I grabbed up a piece of steel. And it was a spring out of a car. And I went in there, I beat out a scramble axe under my power hammer. And I waved a torch over it and got it red hot and slapped it in some oil. And then I drew it with a torch, just half-ass did the thing and slapped some hard maple on there for a handle. And I threw it in a box and sent it to him. I had this sick feeling when I did it because I was I knew that I hadn't done the right thing in my mind. And it was just to get rid of him. And I sent the knife up to him. 2 weeks later, I get this phone call, and I literally got sick at my stomach. "This is Charlie Hoyle. I want to talk to you about my knife." And the first thing that came to my head was, something's wrong with the knife. I got to make him this $150 knife for free now, another one. And he said, "I don't know what you made that out of, but I cut up a cord of rock maple with it, and it'll still shave." And I went into a panic. I said, "Well, what is it?" So I ran back out there in the scrap pile, and I got the other piece of that. And I sent it to a a friend of mine worked up at Teledyne. I sent him that piece of that spring up there, and he looked at it, and that's what it was. It was 5160, probably out of 72 Dodge Duster or something. But what had happened is I had forged that thing, and just by absolute blind luck, got the heat treat and the edge spot on. And that stuff will cut like crazy. This 80 CRV2 is nothing but 5160 with some more alloy and a little bit more carbon, and it cuts like crazy. And so I talked to a friend of mine who's a lot smarter than me, and he said, I told him what I'd done. And he said, well, anytime you use unknown material, you introduce a term into your work called total imponderability. That means even if you get a good result, you can't repeat it because you don't know what you're dealing with. That's why I never, ever use scrap steel anymore. I never use it. I don't care if it's free. The thing is, steel can vary a little bit from batch to batch. And so that's the reason that the Japanese swordsmiths were so picky about what they did with the tamahagani, because every piece of steel they made to make a sword out of was different. So how do you learn to heat treat that? And so what me and a few of my really smart friends did, we got together and we were brainstorming, figuring out how they could heat treat those blades without losing them, because you can't heat treat one of the swords 2 or 3 times or it's done. I mean, you're out of business. And so what we found out is and I've never found anyone that disagreed with it, is the little Kozuka blades that go in the side of the saya. A lot of those you'll find will have hormones in them. And what they were doing was taking a little piece of that material and they were testing the heat treat on those little knives till they got it right. And then they heat treated the big knife. And it just makes sense. I've never found anybody that could find a better way that it could have been done, or I hadn't heard of it yet. There may be somebody listens to this and they'll go, oh no, that's not right. They did it this way. But we think that's the way it is. So there you go.
Well, I guess in that case too, it's like history is written by the victors, right? And so if you spend the time and energy to research things and draw a hypothesis, that tends to be the prevailing theory until somebody disproves it. So if anybody's listening and can disprove it, go for it. But that's interesting though, because that's scientific method, right?
Right.
At the end of the day, a knife maker who spends any amount of time in the trial and error process is actually committing to the act of science, and that's something that's really interested me, because previous to being in making knives and everything, I was actually studying pre-veterinary and pre-med to try to become a veterinarian, and I've always been really interested in science. So there was a lot of things that from a mindset perspective on the research and hypothesis and testing that and trying to prove out whether something is going to functionally work or not, that's always really endeared itself to kind of the way that I think. So
yeah, it's good stuff. I'm a science freak. When I went through school, the public education thing, I was an abject failure. I'd find the grades I liked and I'd just stay in them. That was my plan. If they had the information back then that they have today, I would have the alphabet after my name, and I'm not a doctor. They didn't know what to do with me, but what saved me was my ability to read. And then when the first word processors came out, this is like pre-internet. Fax was a brand new invention when I started writing, because it freed me up, because my handwriting and my spelling was atrocious. And so that freed me up. And then I began to do an enormous amount of research on anything I was interested in. If I was disinterested in it, you couldn't stick it to me with contact cement. I couldn't remember anything. But if it was vaguely in my realm of interest, I collected it and it was in my database. I kept it like that. And so that's what's driven me all these years, is discovery. And then I'm always looking for new methods, and I'm excited about new methods. And I'm always been inventive in that arena because I'm trying to find better ways to do it. Or 90% of what I discovered in the powder metal technology and the canister technology end of it was a way to get around high-tech machining. Which I did some real early EDM work back in the day. That was the only way you could get a prescribed image without a bunch of forging and filing and all that kind of stuff, was to get it wire cut. But a small image with a wire machine, it costs you several $100s, if not $1,000 or more, to have it cut, because the machines are expensive. It costs, and so we developed all these techniques to get around that. So we invented what we call a poor man's hip, which is a hot isothermal press. Most people don't know what they are, but they're an industry thing that was used to consolidate powder into a solid. And so what it is a containment, and you put 40 to 80,000 psi of liquid argon in there, and you heat the thing up to about 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit, and it'll consolidate whatever you put in there into a solid because of the heat and pressure. And so those machines, like I said, it costs you hundreds of dollars just to get one little piece made. And if you made a mistake, it was done. So we were looking for ways to get around that. And that's how all the powder metal and the canisters came to be, and on my end of it. So that was kind of a way I went at it.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because I think, like, so when I've done research on you, and when I've done research on early pioneers of Mosaic Damascus, or modern Mosaic Damascus and everything, there's one thing that is a common thread, and it's that you guys have spent an egregious amount of time and money trying to figure out how to save time and money. And it's I was reading Laren's recent book, and all of the motivators for being able to have easy access to materials and to results that would otherwise cost a lot of money in itself cost a ton of energy and money to figure out. And I think that's one area where passion leads to innovation, because people like me can actually access that technology and that technique a whole lot easier simply by the work that you guys have put in and the extraordinary amount of money and time. And without that, it would be impossible to have the kind of renaissance that we see today in bladesmithing and knife making in general. I just, there's really no way to look at it as a modern knife maker other than we were really sitting on the shoulders of giants. And, I feel like you're one of them.
Well, I appreciate that. One of the things that I've always done is I honor my teachers and the people that helped me, and almost without exception. Because I had a guy named Bobby Tyson that helped me when I first started making knives back in the 70s. I made a few what I call knife-shaped objects in the 60s. I worked at an aircraft manufacturing company, and I got to work on some really cool stuff there. I was on the team that built the first 747 vertical stabilizer, and I worked on Saturn rocket parts and a bunch of stuff. I built stuff, just some amazing things that I got to do there, and that was my first introduction to big double arch forging hammers, because we forged a lot of aluminum there. Anyway, so I got to do some of that, but that technology, that was my first dose of it. And then every southern male's a frustrated knife maker, some more frustrated than others. We just find a piece of stainless or a piece of steel, and we grind out something that looked like a knife. And there's a lot of guys doing that today and selling it, and they don't know anything about heat treating. They're just guessing. And so I call that period of my life the knife-shaped objects era. And and I mean, they were ugly. And then in 1972, I started working out of migrated to Florida, and started working out of Boilermakers local up in Jacksonville as a temporary guy. and I worked for a rigging company. Anyway, the Boilermakers, there were Boilermakers, iron ship fitters, and blacksmiths, and there wasn't any blacksmiths left in the local. And I was really interested in it, and I got a book by Alex Beeler, and it's The Art of Blacksmithing. And there's about a page and a quarter in there on forging knives. I read that, and it flipped a switch in me that didn't stop. It's like the next day I went out and bought an anvil and a little rivet forge, and got me some crosscut saw blades, which were L6 at that time. A lot of them were, and I began to cut those things out hot and make fillet knives for the local guys there, and they would outcut anything you could buy in a quote store. And so they told me I was wonderful, and I thought I was. I have a couple of those knives in my shop that keep me humble. But I'd heard about a guy up on a job in White Springs named Bobby Tyson that was a knife maker. And so he was a pipe fitter, and I made it my mission to go find him. And anyway, I found him. He was leaning up against a big old acid tank at lunch, and I walked up to him. I had 3 of these old fillet knives rolled up in a snotty rag in my hip pocket. And what was in my head was, I'm going to show this guy something about making knives, because my friends told me I was wonderful, and I assumed I was. And I walked up to him. I said, "You Bobby Tyson?" He says, "Yeah, I am." And he pulled out the most beautiful pocket knife. I said, "I heard you make knives." He pulled this knife out, and it walked and talked. And I mean, it would fit in any collection today. And he could make 2 of those a day. And it walked and talked, and it had stag on it. It was made out of some mystery steel I'd never heard of called D2. Anyway, we talked a little bit, and he says, "I got books on making knives." I said, "You have what?" And he said, "Yeah, I have books on making knives." I said, "Where do you live?" He said, "Jacksonville." And I said, No, what's his street address?" And he made the mistake of giving it to me. I said, "Can I come see you?" And I did. I went up there for a weekend. At the end of that weekend, I was 5 years down the road from where I would have been on my own. And I never have forgotten him. And he's still making knives, but he's forging now. And all he makes is these big old choppers. He calls himself Red Moon Forge. He's up in Georgia. And he retired for a little bit. I think he's back at now. But that guy changed my life, and I've never forgotten it. And I never forget to mention him because he took time for me. And I would go up there almost every weekend. And they had a thing called a Bowl City Knife Club. That's where I met Paul Sheffield, who owned Sheffield Knife Supply at the time. And this is back in the early 70s. And we all hung out, and we talked about knives. So I got to making pocket knives. I bet I made 20 before I could sell them without a pair of pliers, because the springs were so heavy. I didn't know how to tune a spring. And anyway, so I finally, everybody asked me, "Why the springs so strong?" I said, "It's a manly knife. If you can't open it, you ain't man enough to own it." That was my excuse. But anyway, that changed my life. And what I see now today is, because the information is free, basically, you don't have to put the time in. You can just sit down in front of your television, and there's a lot of people that have YouTube channels and stuff like that do not give any credit for anywhere the information comes. You see them, they video after video, a technique they learned from someone else. They didn't invent any of it. And I'm not whining about it, but it's just a fact that they never discuss where the information comes. But occasionally you get one that does. And I tell you what, those guys that recognize where their information comes, they'll go far. They will absolutely go far. And it's because that information, like I said, it wasn't free. We spent hours. Nothing's impossible once you know how. I can show you something in a few minutes. It took me years to figure it out. And like I said, I don't allow myself to dwell in that, but it's just a fact in business. And I learned lessons over the years. You'll see these young guys, and they'll come, and they start off, they're all excited, and they'll listen to anybody. And then after they begin to get some success or start selling a few knives, then they kind of clam up, and then they think they've arrived. I've seen thousands of these new makers arrive, and then once they get some knowledge on the belt, they realize they don't know near as much as they did or think they do. And then when you get to my stage of the game, you realize you don't know much of anything. There is so much to explore out there. You physically do not have time to go do it. I'm running around I'll be 76 the 23rd of this month, and I got an 18-year-old kid trapped in here. And so I got to hurry. I'm 4 years away. I don't let any dust settle on me. I've got stuff to do. And so that's what these young people don't understand. Is that you've got to hold your people up. It's like Schmidt taught me how to do file work. And I wanted to do file work. I met him in 79 or 80 up at Ashokan, one of the first ones. And I walked up to him and I was showing him work, and I was doing multi-bar blades then, twisted stuff. I can show you pictures of it. And most of it was Merovingian stuff, and it was influenced by Darrell Meyer, who was doing a bunch of it. Him and that bunch up at Carbondale, Illinois, they were already exploring all those old ones. And it got me all excited. I wanted to try it, so I did some of it. And I went up there, I showed Schmidt my knives, and he had a big old deep booming voice. It was funny. He goes, "Well, who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm Steve Schwarzer." "Where are you from?" I said, "Florida." "Oh, you come up with Pendray?" I said, "Yeah, me and Pendray were up there." He looked at my knives. He said, "Well," he said, "if your knives ever catch up to your steel, you'll be a force to be reckoned with." And I went, "Yeah, that's the nicest I've ever been told. My knives sucked." And but I took it to heart. He was good for me, and he taught me file work. And man, I got all excited about file work. I was doing file work. I was wearing out chainfall files by the handful, kind of thing. And so I made this knife, and I put file work all over it. And I couldn't wait to show him. The next year I went up there, and I couldn't wait. And I ran up to him with that pocket knife, and I put it in his hand. "What do you think?" And he turned it over and over like he was turning a little pointy pine cone. And he said, "Would you buy a new car and put different hubcaps on it?" I said, What do you mean?" He said, "This stuff's supposed to tell a story. You got a new car with 4 different hubcaps on it." I just put the file work on there because it looked cool. And I did a bunch of, so I learned something. It has to flow. It has to tell a story. And so I took that home and I put that to work. I changed the way I did. And it really, those kind of statements from those old legends those were the things that set my work ahead every time. Him and Don Fogg and Jimmy Fikes were probably the greatest drivers, other than Alfred Pendray, were the greatest drivers in my early career, because they were right on the cutting edge of everything. And they would share with you. Darrell Meyer, I always looked at him as a teacher. But you got to give credit where credit's due. It doesn't make you any smaller. I'll give you one more instance. I don't care who it is. I had a guy come in my shop, a young guy, and he hadn't done much with knives. And we were setting up to do a W pattern, and I normally start those in a set of squaring dies, and I'd lay them vertical and start bending those C's over on the end of the block. He said, "Well, why don't you lay it horizontal?" I said, "I don't know." So I tried it, and it worked. And now I do that. And his name is Caleb Budd. He's a young knife maker, and call it the Caleb Budd method. And did it make me any smaller to use his name? No, absolutely not. But I learned something from him because I listened. And anytime I can learn something from you, I don't care whether you just started or you've been at it 1,000 years. If I can learn something from you, I'm all over it. So anyway, I'll stop a minute and let your ears cool off.
Yeah, no, I'm digging what you're throwing down. I mean, I think so too. And something that I've noticed about like the modern knife industry is that emotions are very brittle. In the sense that there's some guys that they don't really want you to talk too much about their methods, because if they convey it to you, it's kind of like a secret. It's like, amongst friends. And there's others that, they don't want to hear criticism because they're not like, you might ask somebody, "Hey, like, what do you think of this?" But you're not really prepared for the bad things about it, or the critical assessment of things. But for me, I've always thrived in that world. I had grandparents that were in World War II. I mean, they were cutting their teeth on shoe leather, and I don't feel like they really held back a whole lot from me. And it was the same way in this Appalachian culture that I grew up in, where it was all about bringing boys to manhood and trying to teach them the things that would give them grit. And so for me, it's always made sense. Like I want that honesty, because I might be slightly offended by it, but it'll give me room to grow. And I'm the one that has to decide on whether you're blowing smoke or whether you're just being unintentionally or intentionally critical of me. But at the end of the day, I would prefer honesty and transparency over a false sense of accomplishment for something I didn't earn.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is that your friends don't want to hurt your feelings. There are two distinct types of people that come to me for critique, and they're pretty obvious. There are those that actually want to learn and get better, and then there's the ones that want to be patted on the head and told they're wonderful, and that's it. And then they want to go on their way, and so it's pretty easy to weed them out. And I'm pretty blunt with it. And I've had people that I've interacted with, and you tell them that, and then they get mad at you for 3 weeks. They don't want to talk. The only time you ever see them is at a knife show. Then they want to talk to you and hang out and meet all your friends, but they're not really wanting to learn. And we've had these knife critique boards at the Blade Show for a few years. I've been on a couple of them, and then there's people that actually want their stuff better. And then there'll be some guy show up and he goes, this is my knife. And you look at it and go, what's the seal? I don't know. It was either this or that. I wasn't sure. I said, you don't know what seal it is? He says, no. He said, but they both heat treat about the same. Well, about the same, yeah. So if you don't know what it is, then what you have is a knife-shaped object that you can't repeat because you don't know what it was made out of. And they don't like to hear that. Then you got another kid that comes up and says, I've been using this steel and I'm having a little problem with this. And then you give them a different heat treating schedule and they go off, set the world on fire. And I've had students in my shop that literally within a year of being there would go around me like I was part. And I'm going, yay, I'm happy. I want to see them excel, because you don't have time to explore everything, and they'll go off down paths you can't get to. And if you're kind to them and share and you boost them up, 9 times out of 10, they'll come back to you with information you can use. I'm like a sponge with that. A prime example is Seth Lopez. He came to me and, I want to make this, I want to make that. And I showed him about some forging. Hell, he ran off and left me with pattern welding and in his particular venue. And his carving, his handle designs are just crazy. And same way with Will Stelter and them. That I've added to their color box. I put some colors in their crayons, but these guys are going to excel no matter what. They really are going to excel no matter what. And then you got people that just struggle, and then you got people that you try to help them, and they're very resistant to any type of help. You show them if you it'll change that, or if you'll start doing tangent lines on your pieces, it'll change the complexity, and they don't want to listen. And so what I've done as an older teacher, and it's taken me a while to figure it out, is when they quit listening, I stop talking. And so I got a captive audience now. They have to listen if they want to, or they can turn the thing off. But it's the people that are truly on the quest to learn, they'll listen to you. Now, the knife stuff, the craft stuff, everybody's an individual. And what they don't get is the only competition they have is themselves. Nobody else can make your knives. You're the only person on the planet that can make your knife. It's like you would go back in the old days, there'd be Bob Lovelace at a knife show. 100 guys in there making Bob Loveless drop point hunters. Okay. And so the guys that were pretty good were getting $200 or $300 a piece for them. And the guys like Steve Johnson and those guys that excelled and worked in Bob's shop, they get $800,000 for one of them. And there's old Bob back there pulling on a cigarette, and he's getting $2,300 to $2,700 a piece for them. And it's the same knife. And some of the knives in that room were better than his. And so it's the story. The guy has the story, and the story is the critical part of it. And that's what a lot of people don't get. You build your legacy by doing good work, but you also have to have a story to go with it. You have to be interesting. If you walk in any knife show in the world and you see people sitting down reading a book, or they got their head buried in their phone or whatever, and they're not addressing any of their customers come by, there's no story there. Even if the work is exceptional, there's no story there. So there's not as much interest as there would have been. And so, I've seen it come and go. And this thing is, there's like thousands of knife makers now. And when I started, there was like 6 people on the planet doing what I wanted to do. And only one of them would talk to me, and that was Darryl Meyer. And so, the world has changed. I mean, you can literally learn anything you want to learn by opening up the internet. You can learn it. And there's a lot of what I call experts out there. And some of them actually are. And that's where you have to learn to winnow it out. In the old martial arts school, and I've done a lot of things that I liked. And if I liked it, I did them pretty well. I wasn't ever world class, but I was good at it. And I did martial arts since 1962. That's when I took my first lesson. Teachers used to say, well, he's not very good, but he's enthusiastic. But you go in, and all that stuff is around body type and your physical abilities. And so if you got a certain body type and certain physical abilities, you're going to excel. And so what you do is you go in, if you're learning from a teacher like that, then you listen very respectfully. You take every bit of the knowledge that he has, and you take the pieces that fit you and you apply them to yourself. That's the same way when you go to learn about a knife technique. I just went to Texas and spent a day with Spencer Aplin down there, and that guy is a friggin' carving genius. Did I want to copy his designs? No, that's his stuff. What I wanted to see was his carving technique and what tools he was using. And he was very kind to me and very generous and showed me that stuff. And huge difference. It took hours off my finish work because I took that time to go down there. It was last year, and it made that much difference in my work. It literally took hours off my carving and finishing work because he's an absolute expert. Do I want to copy his designs? No, that's him. I want to do me, but I want to adapt those techniques to what I do. So that's kind of where I am.
Yeah. Spencer is like an unsung hero in Texas. Like I know that if you know Spencer, I haven't found anybody who doesn't love him. But there's not an exceptional amount of the world that knows about his carving techniques and how he molds steel. And I've always found that his fit and finish is immaculate, and the way that he thinks about the way that he thinks about sculpting steel to me is kind of like the same way that the masters thought about sculpting marble. Like you see some of these just exquisite works, and he's been able to connect the dots in a way that I just don't think anybody else really has.
No, there's not many like him. There's not many like him. He's highly exceptional.
Yeah, and so kind. My daughter really loves him. Like I'll take her to shows when we're in Blade Show, Texas. And the last 2 years I've come along, and he'll this past year we went up and she got to talk to him and everything, and he was explaining things to her about different handle materials and what was stag and things like that, and she was just soaking that up, and he was just so attentive and generous to somebody who is really just kind of vicariously learning about knives through my experience in it. And I've always felt like he has done the same thing for me in being willing to talk, being very candid about the cost of materials and things, because he's spent a lot of time trying to bring in materials like, sandbar, stag, and whatnot that have just previously been very difficult to find in the modern era. And I admire him a ton, not just because of his prowess with his knife making technique, but just how kind and genuine he is.
Oh, he's a genuine good person. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really appreciate him spending time with me. And I like to apply all that stuff. There's a bunch of those good guys out there not people know about. Another one that is just a genius at doing film work and stuff like that is Tony Severio down there out of Elmite, Louisiana. He does some beautiful work. He's been making knives forever, but what people don't know about him, he was in the movie business for years. He knows more about cutting and editing. I've stopped off and gotten a couple lessons from him on the way, to Texas and from Texas. And it's just, he's an exceptional knife maker and stuff, but, people just don't know about them, and they're good, genuinely good people. They're super.
Yeah. Well, so I want to take a step back because generally I try to ask a little bit about my guests' history and history of knives, and I think it's probably worth hearing it directly from you versus trying to read it on your website or from other tidbits. But can you give me a brief introduction of you, like outside of knives? Your life and family, or in your career and things like that, outside of what you've been doing in knives.
Yeah, I did. I grew up in a little small Texas town, and my dad worked in the aerospace industry. And like I said, I wasn't good at school. I hated school. Like I said, I'd find grades I liked and I'd just stay in them. And then he moved us around a little bit. We moved to California in the mid 60s. And I went to high school out there and made some lifelong friends. I just went out and I taught a class out on the Chumash Indian Reservation. A friend of mine, Vincent Menta, and his brother Bo. Bo's the tribal historian. Vincent was the chief of the tribe there for about 12 years, but he's still a very powerful guy. And they're probably the most powerful tribe on the West Coast. They've done more for any of the other tribes than almost anybody. But they're hardworking people. They came up hard and worked hard all their lives. They weren't born with a silver spoon in their mouth. They all work construction, that kind of stuff. One of the things that Vincent does is he collects Little Giant power hammer. He's got one of every Little Giant made from 500 down to a little elf hammer. Anyway, I was teaching a class out there, and this wanders back to me going to high school. One of my lifelong friends over 50 years is a young guy named Ben Tai. He ain't so young anymore, but he's a Samoan kid, and him and his friends, Kilipoa Tuitama and them, they took us in because we didn't know anybody out there, and they protected us. And the street was a little bit rough back in the day, and we surfed and hung out and made lifelong friends out of him. Well, he'd never seen me work, and so I brought him up there for 3 days up there, and of course we stayed in a really nice place, and I was able to visit with him. But that travel out there, we were like in culture shock. We'd never been to any place like that in our lives, and we came back, and of course I finished up high school, and I went to work at the aircraft company where my dad worked for a little while, and got to work and got into forging and stuff. And then of course I moved to Florida in '70, and then I got hooked up with a Boilermakers union in about '71, and then I got into blacksmithing in '72. I'm a founding member of FABA here in Florida Artists and Blacksmith Association. A member of Urbana for many, many years, and made a lot of lifelong friends in that arena. Like I said, I've stayed in the martial arts world for all that time. Like I said, I wasn't ever good at it, but I was enthusiastic, and I've gotten Dan grades in 3 different systems. I do Kempo and mostly Yoshikai karate. I did Katori Shinto Rukendo for a while, and like I said, I enjoyed it. I've got lifelong friends that are in there forever in that, and then I've just done a lot of different things, but nearly my whole self is designed around knives. I did rigging, did water tank work a little bit. I did radio tower work for a little bit. Did a lot of different things. And then in 1982, I got my lungs burned with sulfuric acid gas on a construction job. And I really couldn't work. I could work about an hour, and then I'd have to lay down and sleep. And so I was already, been making knives for a while. So that was the reason I went full-time making knives, is because I physically couldn't go to a job. And I had a wife and 2 kids at that point. Married my wife and adopted both of her kids. And I had to work. They had to be fed. So I'd go out in the backyard in my little 10 by 10 shop, and I would make a few knives and sell them. And a year went by, and 2 years, and then I've never worked another job since 1982 except for a year. And a friend of mine, I lost an eye. I woke up blind in my left eye, and don't know why. I had a total retina collapse. And my daughter-in-law, or my stepson, is a eye doctor. And I went up there, and she looked at it. She said, "This is bad." I said, "This is not going to be eye drops, is it?" And I said, "No." Anyway, she hooked me up with an eye surgeon, and they literally opened my eye up and rolled the wallpaper back up, tacked it with a laser, and they fill it up and put a gas bubble in it to hold it in place. And I had to sit in a chair for 9 days with my head down. You talk about Mr. Happy, Mr. Congeniality. At the end of that 9 days, it took a year for that eye to heal. And that year, I did a consulting job for a friend of mine on designing knives and tools for them. And then at the end of that year, he quit paying me, I quit going, and we parted friends. But other than that, I've been full-time knife maker. I've traveled the whole world doing it. And then one of the other things I did is I got into racing airboats and drag racing, and did that and was successful, and spent a ton of money. It's what boat stands for, break out another 1,000. Well, it was several thousand anyway. So I did that, and then Scott to giving me trouble, and I was before that was actually before I was racing. I was 62, and a friend of mine ran a teaching hospital up east, Sandy Klein. A lot of knife people know him. He was a knife collector, but he liked to make knives as well. Sandy was really a special individual, and he was like the knife maker's doctor guru. Anyway, my shoulder's giving me a fit, and he said, "Well, let me put my guys on it." So he sent me a little packet with a bunch of exercises to do. And I said, "Okay." So there was a little gym down here, a little like family gym with a bunch of machines in it. I thought, well, I'll go down there. And I went down there, and there was this guy in there, and he was built like a refrigerator. He was square. It wasn't real tall, but he was like huge. And he was a good bit older than me. And I looked at him, and he was doing an exercise called Good Mornings, where you bend over at the waist and you got a bar on your neck. He was doing that with 500 pounds. I went, "Oh, man," I said, "if somebody tried to bulldog you, they'd be in a lot of trouble, wouldn't they?" Anyway, he said, "I need a training partner." I said, "Okay." Well, it turned out he was the local police chief here in Crescent City. And I said, "Okay." 7 months after I started training him with him, I broke the Florida State bench press record in my age and weight class. And I went on over the next few years to break 8 world records bench pressing. The AAU records still stand. I bent 408 pounds, and I was almost 64. And so I did that for almost 7 years, and then I just got tired of being sore, and so I did that. There's my whole passion though is around knives. That's all I do. But that I don't do anything a little bit. If I find something interesting, I'm all over it. I want to know everything there is to know about it. It's kind of how the powder metal took off, and that's a story in itself. It's I've been doing canisters for a while, and the story I tell about Daryl Meyer and I don't know who started the canister business, but it was all started about the same time. I think Daryl and those guys were messing with it because what we were trying to do is get around this hot isothermal press because it costs so much. So we were trying to find a way that if you forge weld, if you can keep the oxygen off of it and put enough pressure on it, you can damn near weld it at room temperature. Some things will weld. If they're clean enough, you can cause them to fuse with enough pressure. And so we were working on that. And so I figured out a way that I would take a little piece of tubing, stainless tubing, about 1/2-inch tubing and I would use a refrigerating gauge where you put argon, or not argon, but in a car. And I had a set of those gauges, and a friend of mine worked for a phone company. He'd throw me off a bottle of nitrogen once in a while. I thought, well, I can purge all that nitrogen out of that can. We'd weld up a canister, and this was all solids back in that time. And we put solids in there and weld them. And it worked great. But the first time I did it, I pulled a vacuum on it and just used a vacuum pump. It worked great until you got a crack in the can, and then you're sucking fresh air over your part, which defeated the purpose of the can. So then I decided I would purge it with nitrogen. And then so I would purge it with nitrogen. I'm keeping a little bit of pressure on it. And you could weld at temperatures. I mean, if you told people that where you're welding, they'd call you a liar. But if you can move it, and if you can get fresh material together in the absence of oxygen, it'll hold hands. It'll get a molecular bond. Anyway, so that was working. I couldn't wait to tell Daryl Meyer about that. So I went running up to Daryl. Daryl, one of these hammer ends, and I said, Daryl, let me tell you all about my octopus rig and this T-head and all that stuff. And he listened very patiently. And he says, well, I just put a couple of drops of diesel fuel in mine. I don't have to mess with all that octopus rig. He said, my bubble. He let the air out of my story real quick. And I went, oh, okay. Anyway, that was Daryl. And so anyway, to get on the powder, it was 82 or maybe just a little bit later. It was the first hammer in Jim Batson had at his house, which now became the big thing at Tannehill. But he had it at his house up in Huntsville. And there was a guy there named Gary Runyon. And Gary Runyon was a metallurgist, and he's a geologist trained, but he did metallurgical stuff for Teledyne Corporation and their powder metal division up there outside of Huntsville. And he was over there, and I'd already been doing canisters for a while. And he was over there trying to wick some borax and nickel powder into a piece of cable and weld it. Walked by him, and he said, you Steve Schwarzer? I said, yeah. He said, can you help me with this? And I said, yeah, I think so. And he says, I'm trying to get this to weld. I said, well, why don't you put that in a steel tube and seal it up, and it'll weld? And as far as I know, and I always preface the stuff, there may be somebody off on the other side of the planet that did it before, but this is the first that's the first powder metal canister that I know of, was right there. And then, of course, I got all interested in the powder, and I went up to teach a class for Gary up at Teledyne, and I got to see all the powder to work. And so I decided that that was something I needed to explore. And so the first piece of it I did was my actual signature in a block of steel. I still have some of it. And I had Joe Heidevick take a wire EDM, damned expensive project, and he mapped and cut out my actual signature, and my signature's got a bunch of loops and stuff in it that have inserts in it. And so he made that for me, and it took a long time to do it, and it was damned expensive, and he donated most of the time to it. And I took it home, and I was trying to put little sheets of 10,000 nickel down in there to make my signature. It wouldn't go. So I took it back to him. I said, could you cut that in half? I want to try to use it as a die to force that sheet metal in there. And he cut it in half, and then I destroyed the thing. And then I took it back to Joe, and I'll paraphrase Joe. Golly gee, I wish that hadn't happened, kind of thing. But my ears fell off. Anyway, so he made me another one. And I was sitting there pushing those little pieces back in it that he cut out. But too bad we can't pour that in there. And I said, oh my gosh, I can't. I had an epiphany. So I basically mortgaged my house and bought a drum of nickel powder. And we poured that nickel powder in there, and I welded that signature. And then that metastasized into all the powder mill that we're doing today that I knew about. Now, Larry talked to Ed Shemp and those guys, and they were using some sandblasting grit, but I was totally unaware of it at the time. And so I don't know. I mean, who did what, when, where, I don't know. Don't care. But this is where I started, and it was the first of it that I knew of. And so we started doing some really wild stuff with that. And then, of course, it's grown into what we're doing now. And every bit of it is building on those previous steps. Nothing is impossible once you know how. And so we shared the knowledge with a lot of people. And it's now you see what's being done with it. Now we're doing 3D stuff. So you can do about anything you want with it.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the 3D printing component of what you guys are doing, but I also want to talk a little bit more about like just how complex it is to actually be able to forge weld materials together and get a proper image out in this mosaic concept without deforming it. Because to me, it seems like I can't geometrically wrap my head around all the different steps and ways that you have to manipulate metal in order to get this final result, which is a homogeneous, proportioned image out of it. And I would like, if you could, can you just explain to me when you're pattern welding and when you're doing these mosaic patterns, some of the pitfalls and things that go into actually making a homogeneous image?
Right. That it's easy to explain, and it's extremely difficult to do controlled forging. That shooting scene that I did was a pivotal thing worldwide. It changed the entire forging industry worldwide, almost as much as the powder did. And that was a challenge that was thrown at me. I was doing some pretty neat stuff. You can make curved lines, and if you bend them a little bit, they're still curved lines, but you bend a straight line and it's a curved line, and you're not going to get it back. I won't say it's impossible, but it adds a layer of complexity that you can't even imagine. It requires a bunch of precise high-tech machining and all kinds of stuff to get to where you can cause that material to move, and it's just not worth it. So that control forging was, I'd watched Daryl do some stuff with some straight line work. He did the first radial patterns that were done, and then Shane Taylor out there in Montana capitalized on that. He's probably done more radial stuff than probably anybody else, and has invented a lot of techniques to go with it. And that's a whole different complex thing. But the control forging, I use a lot of squaring dies, and that shooting scene was one of the most complex things that's ever been done. There's been some stuff close to it. I'm actually doing another one of those shooting scenes with as a collab with Henning Wilkerson in South Africa. But that, I've still got the original block that guy came out of, and he was, almost 2 inches tall. And in that blade, he's less than a half inch tall, and his gun barrel's dead straight. He's got heels on his boots and a bill on his hat, and there's some penetrations in that guy where his elbow is and different places, and the dog is pointing and with the leg, and that had pieces in it. So the dog had to be scaled to the guy and joined to the guy, and that reduced, and then that was pulled down, and then the quail were 3/4 inch from a wingtip to wingtip, and they're about a 1/16 of an inch across now, and you still see the flight feathers on them. And that was the control I developed for that project, but it took me months to make that thing. Anyway, you have to be very, very slow. Anybody can make the puzzle. The puzzle or the picture is the easy part. The forging is the difficult part, and it's a feel for it. It's like trying to describe color. How do I know what you perceive as blue or red is that color? What you're seeing, I don't know. I can show you the technique, but I can't tell you how it feels to me. And so you're actually feeling what's going on in a machine that weighs 8,000 pounds, and you're pushing it, and you have to know how the metal flows, how it feels. And then every once in a while, you have to just stop, cut the thing open and look to make sure it's going where you think it is. So you have to be able to think in 3D, and you have to have, it's like a gymnast, only you're doing it with steel. It's positional. You have to know where that image is. And then over time, you build up these skill sets where you know that the further in the bar it is, the less distortion you're going to get. And you also have to know the tools, because a hammer moves material much different than a press does. A press captures the outside and squirts the inside like a tube of toothpaste. And a hammer, if you hit it hard enough, it will extrude, but it builds heat. Where a press is trapping heat. It's a heat sink. It's pulling heat out, and it causes that material to move at a different rate. And that knowledge is really, it's hard to teach. You can teach it. I've got some of my students are very, very good at it, and they've got that spatial awareness. But the 99% of the people that have trouble with these canisters and stuff like that is because they're getting in a big hurry. And the thing is, if they got powder in them, and of course that shooting scene was all solids. There was no powder in that at all. None. It was all solids. And so you have to be aware of how that material's coming down. And it's really difficult to explain, but it can be done because obviously I did it. And there's been a couple of people do some really neat stuff. You can get by with Mosaic stuff because, it's interesting, the control over it. Salem Straub is probably one of the top young bladesmiths on the planet right now as far as pattern development. But he's doing specific designs, and they're very, very controlled, but it's not in the minute stuff. There's a guy in Florida that makes folders. His name's Cliff Parker, and he does a lot of powder, and he's very, very controlled. He's got a really good grip on reducing those images. Now, if you've got a mixture of solids and powder, then you got to remember the powder, no matter how you can put it under that 118-ton press I've got, and it still has to be reduced by 30% before it's a solid. So you have to design all that movement into the part. You don't just print out something and fill it up. If it's all powder, then it'll come down pretty even. But if you got a mixture of solids and powder in there, then the solids are going to stay put, and then the powder is going to compact. And so that knowledge, it's time on the tools. I could show you, and we can make canisters, but you've got to spend the time and learn not to get in a hurry. With the forging, the temperature's got to be right. With powder, your soak times are about twice as long, especially in the beginning, because the particulate won't transfer the heat energy. You'll think it's hot, but it's not. And so all that stuff is just, it takes years of working with it to really develop the skill sets, unless you're one of these young geniuses, and I'm surrounded by those guys now, that they grab it and go. I mean, they don't have any trouble with it at all. They understand how the material works. So that's kind of how it works. The puzzle is easy, the forging is not.
Yeah, yeah, and it's kind of analogous to, it's really hard to stick the landing when you have to deal with all these physical properties. And I'm reminded, like everybody sees NASA when they're doing like docking exercises or things like that for the International Space Station or whatever, right? And like you have all these people that are surrounded and figuring out the equations and the mathematics and physics around how to dock two moving objects that are going at dissimilar speeds and have different thrusts and are dealing with different locales around the earth and everything, and and they get it right. But it takes, in order to get it right, you have to have an exceptional amount of fail safes in order to be able to guarantee, in a high stake, high risk environment, you have to have people around to guarantee that. And it seems like, all these people that are doing this work in Mosaic, Damascus, and pattern welding they're kind of like islands. Like everybody is able to do things by themselves, but it requires so much knowledge to get to the point where they can execute something and have it look the way that it should look. And that, to me, it's always blown my mind. Like I'm sure I could spend an entire career working in this form of Damascus and still feel like I know almost nothing about it.
Yeah, welcome to my world. Because that's about where I am. You'll find out the more you know, the less you know. If you're really on the journey, a lot of guys, they'll get one little thing and they stop. They absolutely stop. But me, I want to play every instrument in the band, and I want to own them. My shop is a testament to that. I got one of everything known to man to make a knife with, and sometimes two or three of them that I can't find because I'm not very well organized. But it's it's a journey, and it's never ending. And what you find out is you get into a time crunch, and the older you get, the faster things go, and it's disproportionate for some reason. But I'm stuck in there. But it's like being in a damn time warp, only it's warping the wrong way, and you're running out of time quick, and you haven't discovered everything you want to see. And it's an amazing journey with a bunch of really amazing people.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, when they talk about age and everything. They say, like, when you're young, you have all the time and no money, and when you're mid-aged, you have no time and no money, and then when you're old, you have all the money and no time.
Yeah, only that, or you're a knife maker, and then, honey, I need this one more tool, and I'll be successful.
Yeah, right. So I'm interested, when you're talking about this, your 3D printed technology and everything. First, can you kind of describe to me a little bit more about what it is that you're doing in 3D printing that is so significant? And then the second part of that, can you talk a little bit more about how that changes the dynamic of how you're doing Mosaic Damascus?
Right. Okay. I got to back up and punt. Back in the early '80s, I started doing a lot of tiling, and where you cut them off and turn them over, and they put them over a center core. And all my early work, I did center cores, and I would do, because I was using a lot of this nickel and nickel sheet and stuff. You can't have that on a cutting edge, so you had to put a center core in it. And so I tiled a bunch of stuff, and then I found out over time that if I put sacrificial material on the outside of that, I had greater success because I had a larger thermal mass, and it kept the air off of it, and the the material on the outside of those little plaquettes, when I was doing those jump welds in there, it would trap that and make them more efficient. But the downside of it was you had to machine all that off of there. So I found out, I don't remember where I got it from. Somebody told me about it. I tried it and it worked. Is I used burned stainless steel foil, heat treating foil, and I would lay 2 little pieces of that on the outside of my little plaquettes that I'd tacked all up, and I'd put sacrificial material over it, and I'd weld the edge out, and I'd forge weld it, and then I'd grind the edges, and those pieces would fall off. And that worked great. It was just super. And this is mid 80s. And anyway, I ran out of that foil. And I thought, well, what do they use in Mokomegani? Well, they use paper to do the same thing. And so I took 2 pieces of copy paper and I laid on there. I put my sacrificial material on, welded it out, and I heated up welding heat, went pop, pop, pop under my hammer, pulled it out. I started grinding the edges, nothing happened. It was like grinding a solid bar of steel. There was no weld line, nothing. And I kept doing it. I thought, there's something wrong. And I put that in acid. I could see mosaic all the way around the edge, end of my center core. And what had happened is that paper had turned to carbon, lowered the eutectic level of both surfaces, because the more carbon you have, the lower the melt temperature of the material is. And so that paper went to carbon and was absorbed like a kid eating cotton candy into the steel and made a perfect weld. It acted like a solder. Well, what came out of that was all the paper forms and tape forms and stuff I did to make flowers and animals and all kinds of stuff out of paper, use that as powder. And with the powder technology, well, down the road, a couple of years ago, I'm out at Kilroy's and I'm teaching a powder metal class out there. And Ron is a genius. He's really a smart guy, and that's one of the greatest groups of people you'll ever work with out there. Anyway, he had his computer guy there, and we were bending little thin sheets of pure nickel, which gave you a bright line, and making images with it and using powder. And he thought, well, what happens if you print a hollow form and just fill it up with powder? And I said, well, what is the plastic made from? It's PLA. Well, it's a plant-based polymer. It's basically paper. It's plastic paper. I said, oh my God, it'll work. And it was like one of those epiphanies. It's like the nickel powder was in the signature. And we went out there, and he has a young lady that works for Curie. She went out there with Kilroy's Works and printed one and went out there and welded it with nickel powder, and it came out perfect. And as far as I know, that was the first piece of 3D stuff that was welded. And then, so the problem, well, it wasn't a problem. The deal was there was too many people involved, and there was no way to protect it with a patent. So we open source that entire process. And a lot of people take Baker Tool and Forge uses it a lot, and they give us credit for the discovery process. And but a lot of people have used it, and they don't say anything about where it came from or anything. And shame on them, but that's life. But there's a bunch of people that have given us credit for it because we shared it. We wanted everybody to be able to use it, because it opens the world for anybody who wants to do a mosaic piece with a specific pattern in it. It takes those thousands of dollars worth of machining out of it, or you forge stuff to shape and make stuff. And that's another way to get shapes, is a forge of shape. But that's how that happened. And we've open sourced it, and he's got all that stuff on his website. And if you don't have a 3D printer, he'll print you one. Now, they've had 3D printers in industry for years that print metal, and that would be the best way to do it. But the problem is that technology costs thousands of dollars. And so what this does is you can use the PLA, and that puts that in the hands of anybody that can buy a $100 printer. And then you're off to see the wizard with your powder metal work. You can make anything you want. And so that's how that happened. But it came off of me doing that first piece of paper in that bar back in the 80s. And it's pretty neat. And then you get into the forging techniques of it, and then that's where, if you get in a hurry, you get a Rorschach test, and if you don't, then you have an image. So that's kind of how that works.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. I mean, because I imagine that when I get into forging patterns, because I want, at some point in time in my journey through knives, I'd like to be able to actually focus quite a bit of time on forging and going down this road of mosaic, damascus, and pattern welding and everything. I'll probably adopt that technique as well, because like for me, there's a wire EDM and doing nickel shimming and everything. To me, just seems like a lot of extra work that I probably don't want to do. And the incredible nature I see to using 3D printing is I can at least start somewhere that lowers the lowers the learning curve, and so I don't have to spend years figuring out how to just get the layout correct. I can start with the 3D printing, and then I mean, the sky's the limit. That's crazy.
Yeah, it puts it in anybody's hands. I don't draw in CAD or anything. I've got a young guy at Bird Forge up the road here, Travis. He's a IT guru, and he's got some printers and stuff, and he'll print stuff that I need, and I let him use my heat treat ovens and stuff to run some of his stuff. We're friends. And Travis Haynes is Bird Forge. He also makes Pelican paste wax. I'll throw that in for him.
There you go. Shameless.
He really is a fine human being. He's a treasure. We like having him in the neighborhood, and he's a good friend. So anyway, I rely on these young gurus to help me with all kinds of stuff. And I've got ideas. Logan Gillahan out there at Colart, he designed and built the computer that runs my 50-ton press, and I get right on the cutting edge of those guys. Those guys are the best people to work with. I've worked with in a long time, and they build a super unit, and they only built 2 of the 50 tons because their cost prohibitive at material costs, and I mean, them cylinders are thousands of bucks, and it costs a lot of money. But that thing is just, I'm lucky to have it. It'll be in the yard sale when I choke over.
Yeah. I'm interested. There's a guy I know that's part of the Texas Knife Makers Guild, and his name's Daniel O'Connor. He started nuclear systems. It's basically they use it a lot for heat treating and establishing hamons and stuff.
He's a smart guy. I've got some of his stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when we're talking about 3D printing and kind of the lowering the barrier of entry for people, earlier this year he kind of wrote a little article, and he off of this clay that he's been making, he started doing a lot of research into sticky flux, which I guess was something that Japanese bladesmiths had used, and he started making this composition of nuclear fusion. So basically, it's just it's a paste that you can put pieces of. What are you gonna say?
Not to interrupt you, but I have a jar of it in my shop.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. The have you worked with it? Because when he posted it,
not yet.
Yeah. When he posted it in January, I was like, dude, this is a game changer potentially. I said, have you tested it in these ways or whatever? And it was basically like, that's the start of this thing. But basically, for everybody who's not aware, is that in standard pattern welding Damascus, you have to have access to some form of a welder to be able to bind those pieces together and then heat them to fuse them. And he's using this fusion clay to be able to dry these pieces together and to establish the weld, so that way you don't have to necessarily have a TIG or MIG or arc weld in order to be able to do that.
Exactly. I'll tell you what I'm using it for, and it'll be this week that I'll do some stuff. I've been setting up to do it. Is jumping bolsters on, where you make a blade and you leave a little extra width there by the blade, and then you take your bolsters and you grind them and use that stuff to fuse the bolster, so you don't have to do any tack welding. You stick your bolsters on, bring it up to welding heat, and hit them, and they fuse it, and it turns that knife into an integral.
I had never thought about that, but that's ingenious. Because something that I've thought a lot about in going down stock removal versus bladesmithing is that there are very clear differences in what you can do with stock removal versus smithing because of your lack of ability to manipulate steel through heat. And one of those things is integrals. Like I really love the look of some integral bolsters and how that entire process works. But in order to do that in stock removal, you have to take a very big chunk of very expensive, knife making steel, and then you have to mill out a bunch of stuff. So basically, half of your work turns into a discard because you're chipping it away, and then you're left with something that if you brick it and you don't get to your final product, you have a ton of wasted material. And something that I've always appreciated is in bladesmithing is the ability to take something that is, it's already there, right? And to manipulate it and form it into shapes and configurations that you don't have to have as much waste. And so when I get to a place where I can use fusion and some of these techniques that you've helped to develop and everything, man, I don't know. My mind's racing, but I don't have the property to have all of my forging equipment and stuff around because I'm in a residential area, and I'm really just waiting. Like I'm collecting knowledge and trying just to kind of figure this game out on the research side, so that way I can play with it. And I just can't imagine how fun it's going to be to mess with all that stuff. And it's thanks to people that are not me. Like I'm sure that my learning curve is going to be cut down by many, many years by all of the stuff that's out there. And it's just I don't know. It's a mind warp to think about all the effort and human energy that goes into creating these things. And I mean, I can appreciate it, but I hope listeners here in the podcast just really appreciate the contributions that you and other like-minded scientists and enthusiasts have put towards it, because without that, I don't think that we would have what we have today.
No, and it's fun. It's like this guy that built this fusion stuff. I'm going to try that, but I think I'm also going to try. I've got an induction heater as well in my shop, and I do a lot of forging with that thing now. And I didn't think I'd use it as much, but I'm going to try to forge weld some bolsters on using that technique, using those things.
Yeah.
And I can just step on a pedal, and I can get to forge welding heat with it easily because you design the coils to fit it.
Yeah.
And then you just go there and whack, and it's done.
Yeah. Yeah. Derek Melton is a bladesmith and blacksmith, and he's actually done a lot of popularization of the induction forge as well.
Yeah. He's the one that tipped me over the edge.
It's crazy. I actually, when we started the podcast, it was Chris Crawford, who's done a lot of videos for knife making, as well as being a phenomenal knife maker himself. But he did videos and brought a lot of people together. And when we were talking early on, I was like, hey, dude, I want to do that, but I also want to do it in like a podcast format, so that way we can be a little bit more agile. Because the editing process on videos and timing that for schedules and stuff is just like ridiculous. I mean, the fact that he has the body of work that he has is great, because it has changed the dynamic of a lot of people's knife making. But he actually, I believe, he was best friends, but I believe he's known Derek since high school or college, something like that. And so we had him on early on. He was, I think, our first guest actually. And I've learned an insane amount just by being introduced to Derek and talking through that. So, he's a sharp cookie. Yeah. Two things that he is really big on is these tire hammers and induction forging. And I can't imagine, based on people getting into the craft and everything, being able to have those two tools could replace, for an entry level bladesmith, a ton of things that just are not like easy to find. Like finding little giant hammers around my area is impossible.
No, Well, if you do a tire hammer, then you know how to repair the thing because you built it, unless you
Yeah.
buy one that's already built from somebody. But go to one, if you know, I recommend that. Go to the workshop and build the thing, and then you know how to fix it. And yeah, Derek is sharp, and Chris Crawford, he's got. I did a canister film for him on canisters, and he has that, and it's available from him.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I don't know. I I think like you and I are birds of a feather. I really appreciate being able to talk to you because I realize, you where I live right now. You grew up not too far away in Pentigo area, Dalworthington Gardens, and that's like right down
Right.
the road. And I had an early career, not career. I had an early experience in martial arts, and my teacher told me basically the same thing. He's like, Aaron, you lack the natural ability to perform martial arts, but you have the tenacity to work through the lack of natural ability. My grandfather told me, he was a World War II. He came from a very impoverished area, and his dad died when he was real young. And he worked from the time that, I don't know, he was like 7 in steel and everything like that. And he was like, Aaron, if there's one thing that I can tell you, if you teach yourself how to read, then you can do anything. And if I think about like the parallels to my experiences in my late 30s and the things that you've experienced in your life, I can really resound with that. So you are a personal inspiration to me because you can, like, there's sometimes I think that you meet people that give you a blueprint of things that you can do and things that excite you and your imagination on what's possible. And you are just one of those people to me.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I've never allowed myself to dwell in any kind of success. I like it when I succeed. I get excited by it and I'm gratified by it. But my teacher, Schmidt, told me something when I first started. He said, you're going to walk in a room and you'll hear them whispering. He said, never believe your own bullshit. And he was right. And I never would allow myself to look at any of that stuff. And so recently I decided that I would start going through my archives. I've kept a lot of stuff over the years where I was published and that sort of thing. And I had Laura go through it because I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to read it. And she went through it, everything we had, page by page. And I've been in over 150 different publications, not 150 Blade magazines, but 150 different publications and over 50 hardbound books in my career. I had no idea that much stuff existed out there. I've been published on almost every continent, and it was pretty amazing to look back at it. I kind of laughed. There was even a Grit newspaper. I don't know. You're too young to remember Grit, but back in the 50s and 60s, that was a nationwide, like, it was almost like the Farmer's Almanac if you got the Grit. And I made the front page of Grit way back in the 80s. Anyway, I've got, and look through all that stuff and go, I don't remember half of this stuff, because I've been so busy discovering new stuff. I don't dwell in the past. I dwell now. I had a guy one time, and this goes back to ego. And when you're young and you're trying to make your own mark, and you'll see it a lot in knife business, everybody wants to be their own man, and they don't want to be beholden to nobody. But like you said, we're all standing on the backs of giants that came before us. I mean, some of these guys that were before me were just incredible talents. And a guy had copied one of my designs and won a big award with it overseas. And so I got a little incensed by it. And this is pre-internet. It's all faxed. Anyway, I won't go through the whole thing, but I was kind of upset by it. And if I had just sat still and kept my mouth shut, everything would have been fine. But no, I had to rise the bait like a carp after a dough ball. And so I went for it. And anyway, the conversation got a little tense. And anyway, we're still friends, but it got a little stressed. Anyway, if I had waited till I seen the knife, I would have never been upset. And so I was telling a friend, I was relating this to a friend of mine. He was an appellate attorney for 40 years. And he's a brilliant mind. He's been one of my closest friends since 1982. And he said, there's a poem by Rudyard Kipling that fits this. I said, well, give it to me. It's the only poem I ever remembered from the first reading. He said, they asked me how I did it. I gave them the scripture text. You keep your light a burning a little ahead of the next. They copied all they could follow, but they couldn't copy my mind. So I left them sweating and stealing a year and a half behind. And what that comes down to, there are people that create and there are people that copy. And if you only copy, you can only copy what's there. But if you create, you always have new ideas. So never worry about the old ideas. You always worry about creating the new ideas. And that's where I choose to live, is creating new stuff or developing techniques. If somebody shows me something new and I think I can add to it, I'll jump right on it. I do it all the time. I'm still doing it. You know, if somebody's doing something cool, I want to see it. I just spent 10 days in Hawaii with Neil Kamimura. He's probably one of the brightest young bladesmiths on the planet. And I watched some of the stuff he was doing, and I'm looking at it, going, man, that's cool. But he honored his teachers, and one of them, Rico Malmasi, and the other one is Peter Burt, who lives there on the island. Peter is one of those hole-in-wall guys. You don't think, but he's doing woots. He's doing clay Damascus. He's making precious, you know how they make the precious metal clay? Well, he's doing clay with steel, and he's doing some in stainless. But he's figured that out, and you can get that intel on what he does off of his website if you want to pay into his Patreon just to pay him a little bit for his research time. But he's developed some stuff in pattern weld and in that clay that nobody else has done. I fooled with the clay back in the late 80s a little bit, but I never did follow it up. I didn't follow along. He is the first guy I know that did a whole blade out of clay and fired that thing, and he's got a finished knife. That's where he is. And that's one of these guys that nobody knows about. That's probably, he does a lot of Woots research. He does a lot of cast steel research. And he's on a farm over there in Hawaii off the side of the hill. And he's just amazing talent. Amazing talented guy.
Oh yeah. I've followed his work on social media because the way that I came to know his work and everything, it was actually I watched a video on YouTube that was about woots, and Al was in it, and then I started down this rabbit hole of trying to understand woots and what those. I guess those dendritic formations and everything looked like, and kind of getting into the science of things. And then I saw Peter's work, and I've been following him on social media to see everything that he's done. And so it's kind of weird that, you know, when without understanding the context behind knowledge, sometimes it's really hard to understand how profound that is. And that's one thing I've really benefited from with social media is like we're in a time where you can be a fly on the wall of history being made every single day, and it's almost like drinking from a fire hose. But it's kind of interesting to me because my understanding from you and your career is that not to try to misword this, but you kind of fell, like after this illustrious career in working in knives, you kind of fell into this obscurity of sorts until a few years ago when you got into social media and reignited that. Can you talk a little bit about that for me?
Yeah, well, I'll throw one thing at you before my mind skips a beat. Is me and Pendray and a guy named Bob Job started the Woots stuff, and it was mostly Alfred. But this other guy, he was into Buckmeister Fuller and buckyballs and all that stuff, and he was a pretty neat guy, and he was always bringing us mystery steel, but he was really into Woots research and did all the early Woots research. And then Al and I worked on those projects together for a long, long time. And then Alfred finally solved the mystery of forging it. And then we worked together. But all the first blades that were made are marked P for Pendray, J for Bob Job, and S for Schwarzer. And I've got pictures of those blades and the stamps and everything here. And then he got involved with Dr. Verhoeven early on, and Bill Dausch from Nucor Steel, and they moved on with that project. And I was busy trying to feed a bunch of kids, so I went and did something that would pay me. Research that pay anything. But all right, now where were you directing me before I got shuttlecocked over to the other side of the net?
No, I appreciate that context for sure. I mean, people need to understand that when it comes to what we understand as woots today, you had your hand and feet and body in that research. So I appreciate you making that distinction. But specifically, what I was talking about is like, you spend all this time in the analog world. It's like I'm going to talk through knife shows and hammer-ins and things like that, and then a year later you'll come back or whatever and talk to these people and show what you have, right? Like all this research you've done. But then, and you did that for forever, and then social media comes around and everybody thinks that if you're not online, you don't exist. And I'm interested to know, because over the last 4 or 5 years, you went from still being an analog to coming into social media and everything, and your career kind of like resurged in a way that I want to be able to talk about.
Oh, absolutely. It was the young guys that came in my shop and said, well, I didn't know. I mean, I'm before internet. Fax machine was a new thing when I was a young man. Fax. There wasn't such a thing. Internet didn't exist. None of it did. Bob Jones was still in his damn basement working. That's how far back that I was working. And most people don't get it. They don't think, well, 70s, in the 60s, Vietnam War was going. Anyway, I was up here, and I was. What happened to me is, I 17 years ago, I was happily married to this wonderful lady, and she passed. Like, she got sick in the morning, and that afternoon she was gone, and it took the wind out of my sails. Because I used to write for Blade Magazine a lot. I wrote for them for almost 10 years. I still write fairly often, but I just think my life kind of light went out of it for a while, and so I didn't know anything about social media. I thought, hell, Don had his site, but hell, I didn't even go on that. Like once in a while, I didn't understand how any of it worked, and so I was having a few people come to the shop, and they said, well, you need to do Instagram. I said, what is that? Or you need to do Facebook. I said, what's the Facebook? And so they started telling me about it. I said, man, I don't want to do any of that. That's nonsense. And then I had a couple of people come, the students, and they went, you should be on social media. And I said, man, nobody knows who I am. They could care less. They kind of given up almost, on that part of it. And I was still, teaching at a high level, but I wasn't doing as much teaching. And these guys kept on me about this. I said, well, okay, I'll do it. And then I started figuring it out, and I'm still trying to figure it out. I don't worry about the algorithms or any of that stuff. I just post stuff. If it's interesting to me. Most people don't like pictures of my dog. They want to see me on fire in the shop kind of thing. But I've had some really good people here that understand that world, and they explained it to me. And I thought, well, okay, I'll do that. And I did that, and it changed my life. It changed everything I do. And it's not that I'm bound to it, but it has put me in connection with people that I would have never met. And one of them is Henning Wilkerson. I met him on there. I watched him work, and I couldn't believe the level of skill that guy has. And he's just an amazing guy. So we cooked up this deal for me to come to South Africa and teach some classes, teach him. And we'd do some collab stuff together. But the whole plan was for me to go over there and watch him work, because he's probably one of the best guys on the planet of marrying stuff. See, he comes out of a gunsmithing tradition, but not only he's got it all, he thinks with both sides of his brain, and he thinks in 3D, and he can do the machine work, the calculations, and the finish work, and the design work. He can do it all. You know how rare that is? That's extremely rare. The guys that are absolutely on the cutting edge of the entire business, they all have that in common. They think in 3D, and they're able to execute. Jason Knight's one of them. He can design stuff in a minute. He thinks in 3D. Only his 3D is a kaleidoscope. It's got a million different colors in it. I've known Jason Knight since he was 13 years old. He used to write papers in school about me. And we've been lifelong friends since he was like 13 years old. But that social media is what drove all that. And then he invited me up. I did his Ford series with him and all that stuff. I've had a bunch of film crews here over the years doing different stuff. And there's some more of that stuff coming down the road in the future. But all that stuff is well and good. But I enjoy the people and interacting and teaching people. I do a good bit of teaching on social media. And it's pretty gratifying, actually. But getting a grip on it, it's like Neil Kamimura told me, he said he'd never seen anybody in my age group do what I did with it. And I went, okay. And I don't know. It's kind of fun. I finally got recognized, got inducted into the Hall of Fame this year up at Blade Show. That was a benchmark. I won every major thing for the ABS and the Knife Makers Guild. I was vice president of the Knife Makers Guild in the 90s. Most people not aware of that. But I hadn't been a member in some years. But I still, I've been the longest serving ABS Mastersmith, continuously serving. Don Fogg has been a Mastersmith longer, but he quit for a while. And there may be another one out there somewhere I don't know of. But anyway, I've been at it a long time. And to share this life's experience on social media is kind of a big deal, because you get a bigger audience there than you would ever get in a bookstore, I think. So that's kind of why I do it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's it's a lot to unpack, because I don't know, like there's a lot of philosophy in knives, and there's a lot of like overthinking and neuroticism in knives, and I'm sure in many crafts, right? And I personally feel like I've reinvented myself a million times already in a short experience in just one craft, and to see the rise and fall of your career makes me think that it's not just me. It's normal that you are always reinventing yourself, and so like that's something I think that if anybody takes away one piece of philosophical knowledge from this interview, I'd like it to just be known that you're from cradle to grave, you have the opportunity every single day to reinvent yourself and to reconfigure your life to fulfill whatever your life purpose is. And if there's anyone that can exemplify that, it's you. And I really appreciate you taking that time to be able to share yourself with us and to be vulnerable in that way, because it's not so often that people are just so open that they're willing to allow themselves to be captured candidly the way that you do. And I really appreciate you.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'll give you a parting shot. And this is something I've learned after years of self-reflection and listening to some very, very bright people that go around me like I'm parked mentally. In life, you have an agenda. Everybody does. You do, I do, my wife does. Everybody has an agenda. And what you're looking for is a stream in life where people are going in your direction, that same goal, or in the general direction that goal is. And you do not let negative stuff drag you off or drag you back. You get rid of it immediately. You don't belabor it. You don't dwell on it. You don't think back on it. You just turn it loose and move forward. You can grieve over the death of a loved one, but it'll never bring them back. And you can't change one syllable that came out of your mouth a second ago. All you can do is regret it. So if you're going to move your life forward, then you need to move in positive and don't let the negative get you. The only person that can create your work and your art space is you. You're the only one that can do it. It's not somebody else's responsibility to make you happy. That's your job. That's the reason my wife and I've got the best partner on the planet for me. She might not be perfect for anybody else, but she's the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. And she's just amazing because I'm not responsible for her happiness. She's responsible for it. I'm responsible for me. And generally, if I'm happy, everybody around me happy. And by people that really know me, if I'm unhappy, you will be very uncomfortable. That's just the way I am. Anyway, I appreciate the opportunity, and it's been fun.
Yeah, Steve, it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for the time, and I will post up all your social media stuff just to kind of continue on that tradition of giving you more exposure. I hope in some small way that the podcast does that. But really, you do a greater honor and service to me and the listeners because there's just too much. There's too much to unpack in this, and I hope that it serves as an example of you in a small way, and that people can listen to it multiple times and pull knowledge from your words to further themselves. So I really appreciate it. It's a total honor, and thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome, sir. Appreciate you taking time to do it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.